July 12, 1979. 2:45 p.m. Joe and Mary's Italian-American restaurant, 205 Knickerbocker Avenue, Bushwick, Brooklyn. The back patio. A hot summer afternoon. Carmine Galante sits at a table with his back to the brick wall, a cigar clenched between his teeth. He's eating lunch. Salad. Wine. His bodyguards sit nearby. Leonard Coppola, Giuseppe Tirano, the restaurant owner, Baldo Amato and Cesare Bonventre, his two Sicilian protectors, young, loyal, lethal. At 2:45 p.m., three men step through the restaurant. They're wearing ski masks and they're carrying shotguns. They walk calmly onto the patio. No running, no shouting, just purpose. They raise their weapons. If you're enjoying this deep dive into the story, hit the subscribe button and let us know in the comments from where in the world you are watching from today. Carmine Galante, 69 years old, acting boss of the Bonanno crime family, former heroin kingpin, defiant psychopath, dies in his chair. Multiple shotgun blasts to the face and chest. The cigar still clenched between his teeth. His left eye blown out. His lunch unfinished. Leonard Coppola, shot in the head. Giuseppe Tirano, shot in the chest. Both dead. Baldo Amato and Cesare Bonventre, Galante's supposed bodyguards, untouched. Not a scratch. They survive without firing a single shot. That detail, more than anything else, told the story. This wasn't a robbery. This wasn't a rival gang. This was an execution. Sanctioned. Internal. Planned by the people Galante trusted. And for 45 years, the photograph of Carmine Galante slumped in that chair, cigar still in his mouth, blood pooling on the patio floor, has defined mob violence in America. The image became iconic. The message was clear. You don't defy the commission. You don't muscle into the heroin trade without permission. You don't ignore the bosses. And you don't survive when you do. But here's what most people don't understand about Galante's assassination. It wasn't sudden. It wasn't impulsive. It had been building for decades. Galante had been marked for death long before that cigar-clenched photograph. His defiance wasn't new. His disrespect wasn't recent. And the men who ordered his execution had been watching him for years, waiting for the right moment. This is the story of how Carmine Galante spent his entire life pushing boundaries the Mafia wouldn't tolerate. How his time in prison didn't humble him, it emboldened him. How his return to New York in 1974 set off a power struggle that ended the only way it could. And how the photograph of his death, cigar still burning, became the mob's ultimate warning. Because Carmine Galante wasn't killed for one decision. He was killed for a lifetime of them. The heroin empire was just the final insult. The commission had already decided. They were just waiting for the table to be set. Carmine Galante was born February 21, 1910, in East Harlem, New York. His parents were Sicilian immigrants from Castellamare del Golfo, the same town that produced Joe Bonanno, Salvatore Maranzano, and Joe Prophesy. That connection mattered. Castellamare produced a specific type of mobster. Old world, brutal, loyal to blood, not business. By his teens, Galante was already violent. He dropped out of school. He ran with street gangs. He committed robberies, assaults, extortion. At 10 years old, he was arrested for assault. At 14, he was sent to reform school. At 17, he was convicted of assault and robbery. The pattern was set early. Galante didn't negotiate. He took. In the 1920s, Galante became an enforcer for the Bonanno family. Joe Bonanno, the boss, saw potential in him. Galante was fearless, ruthless, and willing to kill without hesitation. By the 1930s, Galante was a made man. He ran rackets in East Harlem and the Bronx. Loan sharking, gambling, extortion. But his specialty was murder. In 1930, Galante was suspected of killing a police officer during a robbery. He wasn't charged. In 1943, he was implicated in the murder of Carlo Tresca, an anti-fascist Italian journalist shot dead in Manhattan. Tresca had been writing about Mussolini, about fascist sympathizers in the Italian-American community, and powerful people wanted him silenced. Galante was the suspected triggerman. He was never charged. That's how Galante operated. Suspected, known, never convicted. He moved through murder like it was administrative work. No emotion, no hesitation, just execution. But here's where Galante's story takes a turn. In the 1950s, the Bonanno family sent him to Montreal. His job was to establish a heroin pipeline from Europe through Canada into the United States. This was the beginning of the French Connection, the smuggling network that would dominate the American heroin trade for 2 decades. Galante set up operations in Montreal. He worked with Sicilian and French-Canadian networks. He established contacts with Corsican smugglers in Marseille, France. Pure heroin was refined in French labs, smuggled into Canada, then brought across the border into New York. The operation generated millions, and Galante ran it. Not as a soldier, not as an earner, as a boss. He built relationships. He controlled distribution. He became indispensable, and that power went to his head. By 1960, Galante was one of the most powerful heroin traffickers in North America. But he was also visible. Too visible. Law enforcement noticed. The NYPD noticed. The FBI noticed. And in 1962, Galante's luck ran out. He was convicted of narcotics trafficking conspiracy. The charges were federal. The sentence was 20 years. On July 10, 1962, Carmine Galante entered federal prison. He was 52 years old. Most men would have been broken by that sentence. 20 years means you come out old, forgotten, powerless. But Galante wasn't most men. He used prison the way he used everything else. As leverage, Galante served 12 years. He was released on parole December 21, 1974. He walked out of Lewisburg Federal Penitentiary at 64 years old. Most mobsters at that age retire. They step back, collect tribute, enjoy their grandchildren. Galante did the opposite. He came back angrier, hungrier, more defiant. Here's what changed while Galante was in prison. The Bonanno family had fractured. Joe Bonanno, the founder, the godfather, had been forced out in the 1960s after a failed power grab known as the Bonanno War. The Commission, the ruling body of New York's 5 families, didn't trust Bonanno. They forced him into retirement. After Bonanno's exit, the family was run by a series of weaker bosses. Gaspar Di Gregorio, Paul Siaka, Natale Evola, Philip Rostelli. None of them had Bonanno's authority. None of them commanded respect. The family was vulnerable, and Galante saw an opportunity. When Galante was released in 1974, Philip Rusty Rostelli was the official boss. But Rostelli had his own problems. He was facing racketeering charges. He was distracted, and he didn't have the muscle to control the family's day-to-day operations. Galante stepped into that vacuum. He didn't ask for permission. He didn't wait for an official promotion. He just started acting like the boss. He held meetings. He gave orders. He collected tribute. He promoted loyalists. And most dangerously, he restarted the heroin operation. By 1977, Galante was importing heroin again. He rebuilt the Montreal pipeline. He reconnected with Sicilian suppliers. He brought in Zips, Sicilian-born mafiosi who were loyal to him personally, not to the American families. He installed them in pizzerias across New York and New Jersey. These pizzerias became fronts for heroin distribution, a network that would later be exposed in the Pizza Connection case. Galante was making millions, and he wasn't sharing. Here's the problem. The Commission had rules. The 5 families, Gambino, Genovese, Lucchese, Colombo, Bonanno, were supposed to operate cooperatively. Big moves required approval. Narcotics, especially, required permission because heroin brought heat. Federal heat. DEA heat. The kind of attention that endangered everyone. But Galante didn't care about the Commission. He ignored them. When they summoned him to meetings, he didn't show. When they sent messages, he dismissed them. He operated like he was untouchable, and that arrogance was fatal. Now, here's where the politics get complicated. Philip Rostelli, the official Bonanno boss, was furious. Galante was undermining him. Galante was acting like the boss without the title. Rostelli wanted him gone. But Rostelli couldn't act alone. He needed permission from the Commission. And the Commission had its own reasons to want Galante dead. Paul Castellano, the Gambino boss, saw Galante as a threat. Galante's heroin operation was massive. It was generating wealth that should have been shared. And Galante wasn't sharing. Anthony Fat Tony Salerno, acting boss of the Genovese family, hated Galante. Galante had disrespected him publicly. Salerno wanted him eliminated. The Lucchese family, the Colombo family, they all agreed. Galante had to go. But there was a complication. Joe Bonanno, the family's founder, still had influence. He was retired, living in Arizona, but his name carried weight. And Bonanno had mentored Galante. He'd promoted him. He respected him. The Commission needed Bonanno's tacit approval, or at least his silence. According to mob historians and testimony from cooperating witnesses years later, the commission reached out to Bonanno. They explained the situation. Galante was defying them. Galante was bringing heat. Galante had to be removed. If you find this story engaging, please take a moment to subscribe and enable notifications. It helps us continue producing in-depth content like this. Bonanno, according to sources, didn't object. He didn't give explicit approval, but he didn't defend Galante either. His silence was permission. With Bonanno neutralized, the commission gave the order. Carmine Galante would be killed. The hit was assigned to the Bonanno family itself, specifically to a faction loyal to Philip Rostelli. The killers would come from inside, and Galante's own bodyguards would help set it up. Baldo Amato and Cesare Bonventre, both Sicilian, both Zips, both brought to America by Galante personally. They were supposed to protect him. Instead, they betrayed him. According to FBI reports and testimony that emerged years later, Amato and Bonventre were approached by Rostelli's faction. They were told the hit was sanctioned. They were told they'd be protected if they cooperated. And they agreed. Their job was simple. Make sure Galante was in the right place at the right time. Make sure he was vulnerable. And make sure they didn't interfere when the shooters arrived. July 12, 1979, was a Thursday. Galante had a routine. He often ate lunch at Joe and Mary's restaurant on Knickerbocker Avenue in Bushwick. The restaurant was owned by Giuseppe Turano, a Bonanno associate. It was a safe place. Or it should have been. That afternoon, Galante arrived at the restaurant around 2 p.m. He was with his cousin, Giuseppe Turano, his bodyguard, Leonard Coppola, a Bonanno soldier, and his two Sicilian protectors, Amato and Bonventre. They sat in the back patio. Galante ordered lunch. Salad, bread, wine. He lit a cigar. A De Nobili, his favorite. Short, thick, Italian. He always had one. At 2:45 p.m., three men entered the restaurant through the front door. They were wearing ski masks. One carried a shotgun. Two carried pistols. They walked through the dining room without saying a word. The restaurant was nearly empty. No customers stopped them. No staff intervened. The three men stepped onto the patio. Galante looked up. They opened fire. The first shot hit Galante in the chest. Buckshot. Close range. He slumped forward. The second shot hit his face. His left eye was destroyed. The third shot hit his chest again. Leonard Coppola was shot in the head. He died instantly. Giuseppe Turano was shot in the chest and back. He died on the patio. Baldo Amato and Cesare Bonventre dove for cover. They didn't draw weapons. They didn't fire back. They survived without injury. The three gunmen turned and walked out. No running. No panic. Just calm, professional execution. They climbed into a waiting car on the street and drove away. The entire hit took less than 30 seconds. When police arrived, they found Carmine Galante slumped in his chair, blood pooling beneath him, his cigar still clenched between his teeth. That cigar became the defining image. News photographers captured it. The photo ran in every major newspaper. Time magazine, Newsweek, the New York Times. The image told a story. Galante died defiant. He died mid-meal, mid-cigar, mid-thought. He didn't see it coming. Or maybe he did and didn't care. But the real story wasn't the cigar. It was the bodyguards. Amato and Bonventre were questioned by police. They claimed they didn't see the shooters. They claimed they were caught off guard. The NYPD didn't believe them. The FBI didn't believe them. And the Mafia knew the truth. Amato and Bonventre had set Galante up, and they were rewarded for it. In the aftermath of Galante's death, Philip Rostelli solidified control of the Bonanno family. He was officially recognized as boss by the commission. The internal rebellion was over. Baldo Amato and Cesare Bonventre were promoted. They were given more responsibility, more money. For a while, they thrived. But here's the thing about betrayal. It doesn't end cleanly. Cesare Bonventre was killed in 1984. Shot multiple times, his body dismembered and stuffed in 2 oil drums in a New Jersey warehouse. According to mob insiders, Bonventre had become a liability. He knew too much. He talked too much. And the new Bonanno leadership decided he couldn't be trusted. Baldo Amato survived longer. He was arrested in the 1980s during the Pizza Connection trial, the massive federal prosecution of the Sicilian heroin network Galante had helped build. Amato was convicted of racketeering and narcotics trafficking. He was sentenced to decades in prison. The 3 gunmen who killed Galante were never officially identified. But according to mob informants and testimony that emerged later, the shooters were likely Bonanno soldiers loyal to Rastelli. Names like Dominic, Sonny Black, Napolitano, and Anthony Indelicato have been mentioned in various accounts, though neither was ever charged with the murder. Anthony Indelicato, son of Bonanno capo Alphonse Sonny Red Indelicato, was later convicted of participating in the hit based on testimony from cooperating witnesses. He was sentenced to life in prison, but was released in 2023 after serving over 40 years. Philip Rastelli remained boss of the Bonanno family until his death in 1991. He died of liver cancer in prison while serving time for labor racketeering. He never faced charges for ordering Galante's murder. Paul Castellano, the Gambino boss who helped approve the hit, was himself assassinated in 1985, shot outside Sparks Steakhouse in Manhattan on orders from John Gotti. Anthony Fat Tony Salerno, the Genovese boss, was convicted in the commission trial of 1986 and sentenced to 100 years. He died in prison in 1992. Joe Bonanno, the family's founder and Galante's mentor, lived until 2002. He died in Arizona at age 97, one of the few mob bosses to die of natural causes outside prison. He never publicly commented on Galante's death. So, what does Carmine Galante's assassination reveal? It reveals the limits of defiance in organized crime. Galante was fearless. He was brutal. He was successful. But none of that mattered when he crossed the commission. The Mafia isn't a meritocracy. It's not about who's the toughest or who earns the most. It's about rules, structure, respect. And Galante violated all three. He ignored the commission's authority. He muscled into narcotics without permission. He treated other bosses like they were beneath him. And that arrogance made him a target. The cigar clenched in his teeth wasn't a symbol of toughness. It was a symbol of denial. Galante believed he was untouchable. He believed his reputation, his connections, his ruthlessness would protect him. They didn't. The photograph of Galante's death became iconic because it captured something true about the Mafia. Power is temporary. Defiance is fatal. And no one, no matter how feared, survives when the organization decides you're done. Galante spent decades building a reputation as one of the most dangerous men in organized crime. He killed without remorse. He controlled a heroin empire. He defied bosses, ignored warnings, and operated like he answered to no one. And in the end, he died eating lunch, shot by men sent by the same organization he'd served his entire life, betrayed by the bodyguards he'd trusted, killed because the commission decided he was more trouble than he was worth. That's the real lesson of Carmine Galante's assassination. In the Mafia, there are no untouchables. There are no exceptions. You follow the rules, or you die in a patio with a cigar in your mouth and your lunch unfinished. The photograph of Galante slumped in his chair, cigar still clenched, blood pooling on the concrete, wasn't just evidence of a murder. It was a message, and every boss in New York understood it. If this deep dive into the hit that redefined commission authority opened your eyes to how mob justice actually works, hit that subscribe button. We drop untold Mafia stories every single week. Stories that go beyond the headlines and into the cold, calculated reality of organized crime. Drop a comment below. What other mob execution should we investigate? What assassination from the underworld deserves its own breakdown? Let us know. Because at Mafia Talks and Street Files, we don't just retell the legends. We uncover the truth the bosses tried to bury. Thank you for watching. For more detailed historical breakdowns, check out the other videos on your screen now and don't forget to subscribe.